Welcome to this Power Automate Cloudflow tutorial that's going to walk you through how to set up a Cloudflow that will do a number of onboarding actions for a particular project. Now, the flow is going to be kicked off when someone submits a, a SharePoint list form. And what that action is going to do is kick off a number of things, including the creation of a new Teams team. And it's going to also add members to that team. It's going to update some group settings of that team. It's going to create a planner plan copied from an existing planner plan template. And then it's going to update some details of that planner plan. It's going to create the plan buckets and tasks based off the template. It's going to add the planner tab to the general channel of the new team that gets created. It's going to create a OneNote based off of a existing OneNote template. And then it's also going to include a approval. So when someone submits the request, an approval is going to go to a manager to review the details of the request. And then that person, if they approve it, it will then do all the actions that I previously mentioned. If they reject it, it will delete the item from the SharePoint list and it will send that person an email with the details of why it was rejected with a link to the form asking them to resubmit the form. So we're going to break this apart into multiple child flows. We're going to have a trigger flow, which is the flow that you're looking at here is our trigger flow. And I'm going to build this with you step by step in all of the child flows that run all of the actions that I mentioned a moment ago. And in order to achieve this, we need to do some foundational work first, primarily the creation of a SharePoint list that will serve as the Teams request. And we're also going to include another SharePoint list, not involved with the automation itself, but rather as a way for us to document all of the flows that we're building. So I'm going to move this out of the way here. The next thing I want to do is go to SharePoint. And in SharePoint, I'm going to create a new SharePoint list. So if I go to the home page here of SharePoint, I have this option where it says new. And if I click the little arrow here, I can create a list. So that's what I'm going to create. And the list is going to have a form attached. So I'm going to create from blank a list. And the name of my list is going to be called Teams Request. And I'm going to check the box for Show List in Site Navigation so I can easily find it. It will already be checked for you, so just click Create. So we're going to add a number of columns here. First column that we're going to add is a project name, and that's going to be a text column. So our Teams request relates to projects. So what we're collecting from the person who submits the form is the project name and a project number, like an ID number. And then we're also adding a bunch of people to the project. And that person that's submitting the form is selecting those people as users that are Microsoft users in the system. So the first thing is, as I mentioned, is a text column. We click Next, and we're going to call this project name. You can give it a description if you want to. It's going to be a single line of text. I'll save it, and then I'll add in another text column. And this one is project number. Depending on your project, the way you have them organized, you could use a number column, but project numbers in my case might include more than numbers. Now, this is for engineering firm, so we have a number of project managers and project engineers. We also have a principal in charge and assigning principal. So what we do is we select the next column as a person. and then click next. This will allow people to select people that are actually Microsoft users in the system because a list form is only available for access by people within the organization. It can't be shared externally. So this one will be principal in charge, and I'll click save. I'm going to add in a few more people here. So I will add in a project manager and then a project engineer. Now, I have everything set, but I don't want to use this title field because the title one is a default column when you create a new list and it cannot be um, modified by the type of column. So I prefer just to not use this. So what I do is I go to column settings and then I hide this column so that what you see here is everything available. Now for doing things like testing and whatnot, I do like to leave the item ID as showing. So if I go to add column and then show or hide columns, you can see the option to add ID. So I'm going to select that and hit apply, and then the ID column will appear there. Now we need to actually add our form that people can use to fill out. And when someone fills out the form, the details will be inserted as a row in our list. So we click Forms up here and then create new form. We need to give the form a title, and I'm just going to give it the same title as our list. So it's Teams Request. And you can see over on the side, you do have the option to organize, reorder your columns. They show up as form fields here, but you don't have to, because if you inserted all your columns in the way you want them to appear on the form, which is what I did here, no reorganization is necessary. So one of the things we want to do is get rid of that title that we've hidden in our list column. So I don't want that to appear on there. I also don't want attachments on there, but it's already unselected for me. And it saves your changes as you work, so you don't have to click save. Now we can click here to send this form. And we can then copy the link and we can give that link to people, and we can also insert that into our workflow. And then up here, we can preview the form to see what it looks like when it shows up to people. So that's what it's going to look like. Now, just to test this out, the project name is test. The project number is 25001. Now, when we start typing in these person fields, you will see that when you start typing, it will prompt you for different people that you can select from. So you can select the people there. I'll just fill all these in, and then we can submit. Once that's been submitted, you can close this out, and I'll just refresh the page here, and we can see that it's been inserted. You can see where the ID column has a 1, the very first entry, list item entry ever for this list. So that's why it will appear there as 1. Even if I delete this row, it will still appear, the next entry will still appear as a 2 in sequence of the ones that were added before it, whether they were deleted or not. Now we have our Teams request form, our Teams request SharePoint list, and our form. And what we can do next is set up a list for our Cloudflow directory. I already have one that I've set up, and you can do something similar. I'm just going to show you what I have, and you can do however you want. It's not pertinent to the workflow that we're building. It's just helping us to keep everything organized. So as we build each flow, we're going to populate the flow details into this flow directory You can also automate this so that it updates itself by connecting SharePoint with Power Automate. But I just want to show you that I have these columns. I have a hyperlink column called Flow Home. That's literally a link that will, if I click on it, will open in Power Automate to the flow page. The status is literally that the flow is on versus off, like it's running. And it can be triggered because it's on. And then I've got a category that I set up. So it's just like what kind of categories. This is a multi-select one. I have a column for flow ID. So that's the ID of the flow you can grab from the URL. The flow type, automated versus manual versus scheduled. The date it was created, the last date it was modified, and a notes column. Now we can head over to Power Automate and we can start building our first flow. Let's get into it. So in Power Automate, I'm going to establish a trigger flow from which all of my child flows that run all the actions, all of the major actions of this workflow. So over on the left-hand side, I'll click Create. Now I have the option from here. This is going to be an automated cloud flow, and it's going to be triggered by that item being added to the SharePoint list that we created. So for flow name, we're going to use a naming convention that I'll call Teams request. And then all of our flows involved with this will all start with the same naming convention of Teams request. I'll add in a dash, and this is the parent flow. You could also call it trigger. So we'll call it trigger parent flow like this. And typically when I build an automated cloud flow, it will always give me when an item is created, SharePoint connector action at the top here. And I don't know if that's how it will be for you or if it's just because I use that trigger often, but that's the one that you want. And if you don't see it there, all you have to do is search when an item is created. Enter, and that's the one right there. So we select it and click create. Now I need to set up my trigger. So I need to actually select this action and select the site address. So I do that. I always forget which one that it is that I'm using, but if I navigate over here in my URL, I can see Jibs Automation Consulting. So that should be this one here. And then I select the list name. And the one that I just created is Teams request. So now that I have that, it's going to run when an item is created, Teams request list. So I'm going to modify my action title so that I know it's the Teams request, that list that's triggering this flow. Now, I have a way that I am passing variables the from flow to flow. So from child flow to child flow. We're trying to make this flow as dynamic as possible because the idea here is that we could potentially reuse every child flow that we're about to create across other flows. That's always the idea. If I put this flow together with all of the actions of all the child flows that we're going to create into one singular flow, then it becomes a little bit heavier of a burden for troubleshooting and maintenance versus separating the primary actions into child flows. And additionally, it allows us to reuse those child flows with other lists or other workflows. We couldn't achieve that otherwise. So it gives us definitely some flexibility when building workflows. And that's the great thing about using child flows. Break it down into flow components. So the reason that I'm going to put in the first two compose actions into my flow is because we're going to pass the site address and list name variables. So that's site address here and list name because we're going to use a get item in other child flows. And rather than hard coding as I did here on the trigger, the site address and list name, I hard coded these, right? I selected them from the drop down. We're actually instead, we're going to pass those from the parent flow to the trigger flow, and thus it becomes fully dynamic. So in order to do that, I will put two compose actions. Now I have the compose favorited here in my favorites. To favorite an action, you just click the star here. So you see I unfavorited that. And if I search compose, I can click the star and add it to my favorites. And then it will always be there. I do that for actions that I use repeatedly. Now, this compose is going to compose the site address. So that's why I'm renaming this to compose site address. And the reason I rename my actions as I do here instead of just deleting compose is because it allows for quicker troubleshooting, right? I can know what this action is because I left the original name of the action there in the title. Of course, I can go to settings, excuse me, code view, and code view will tell me that this action is compose. But this allows me for quicker view on what the actual name of the action is because sometimes it's not straightforward. You can see in this code view, it's easy. Yeah, this is a compose action, but that's not always the case. If I go to about, it doesn't show me there either. And it's not, when I say it's not always the case, some actions have a name here of compose, but when you look at the code view, the name is slightly different. So doing it in this way, renaming your actions with, you don't have to use a dash. I do it that way. But that's what separates the original name plus the text that I'm appending to that original name. You can do it any way you want. Now in the inputs, we need an expression. And I'm pasting in an expression, but of course, um, you can get that expression from the video description. So you'll click to add in your expression. You'll click where it says insert expression underneath where you can insert dynamic content. And then here in the expression box, I'll paste that in there. And then I'll click add. So that expression, what it's doing, if I open this up again, what it's doing is it's splitting the location value from this trigger outputs here, the item, and it's splitting it by these keywords here, data sets and tables, and that will result in your actual site address, which is pretty neat. You couldn't obtain that just from regular dynamic content otherwise. So this allows us to achieve something that makes our flow building so much more flexible. So we're going to add another compose because we also need to compose the list name. So again, we're composing site address and list name because we're going to use these in our child flows. So this one, we're going to do the same thing, and you can grab the expression from the video description, and I will paste that in here and click add. Now that I've done that, I'm going to save this and I want to test this. We're going to test as we go. So I want to make sure that this will compose exactly what I intended to compose. So if I go over here, I can trigger this flow. Excuse me, I'm going to go over here to my list, our team's request list. And I don't need to submit it via the forms. I can do that. I can just add a new item with that button there, and and then I can test this out. So the thing you can note here is that the add a new item, it's different from the form. You can see that it's showing my hidden columns, so I have title and attachments. We can deal with that right now, clean this up, just so that as we test, we can just use this add new item button. So you can see up in the top here, there's this edit form. And if we open that, you can do edit columns. and I can remove the title. However, as you can see, I cannot remove the attachments, but there is a way to do that. So if I click save, now it's everything there, but the attachments is still there. Of course, it's not necessary for us to remove that. But for the sake of setting everything up appropriately and having people inadvertently select attachments because they don't need to, and let's just make everything straightforward and clear, right? So what we're going to do is close this. We're going to go to settings and then list settings. In here, if we go to list, it should be under list name, description, and navigation, because if I go down here to the columns, there is no attachment column there. So let's click here. And it's not there either. Go to advanced settings. And here is attachments. Specify whether users can attach files to items in this list. Attachments to this list items are enabled or disabled. So I'm going to select disabled, scroll down to OK, and then OK to the pop-up that you get. And then let's go back to our list. The navigation is kind of weird, but you do have the navigation over here for Teams request. So I will click there and then click add new item, and attachments is still there. So let's see if we can figure out how to hide that, or maybe I just need to refresh. Yes, I just needed to refresh. Okay, so we're good to go on that. So let's test our trigger now. So our project name, you can literally put anything that you want in there. Our project name will just be Tim, the name of a person. The ID again can just be a random number. We're just testing. We don't actually need to fill in all of these details. None of these I've made required fields anyways, so we just go ahead and just trigger it. Nothing that we're testing right now has anything to do with what we're actually adding into our Teams request form. So now that I've added that item, I can go back to my flow. I'll go back to the flow homepage, and then you might get this little pop-up. I'm gonna click don't show me this again because we're gonna be creating a bunch of flows here. So, and then got it. I'll refresh here on my flow run history. And the first time that you run or try to trigger the flow, it might take a little bit. Even subsequent runs are not always instant, but you can see that one ran and it took 4 seconds. So let's go into this run. Click there, go into the flow, and you can see a successful run. If we click on the compose, this is where we want to make sure that it resulted in that URL that we're looking for. And you can see here that it did. So it gave us exactly what we're looking for. Here's the outputs, excuse me. And then the list name, Teams request. So that's exactly what we wanted it to return. Now we can move on to the approval request. So we're going to stop here and we're going to start up the next video in this series that will show us step by step the approval request so that when someone submits the form, approval request goes to a person or persons, and then that person's going to either approve it and that will run the rest of the actions, creating the team, or they'll deny it and that will result in an email.